Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to worship at Westminster and our inclusive family of faith. We particularly welcome our visitors and those who are joining us on YouTube.
Oh Lord, please hear my prayer. In the morning when I rise, it's just servant bound for glory. Oh dear Lord, please hear my prayer. Oh Lord, please hear my prayer. Keep me safe within your arms. It's just servant bound for glory. Oh dear Lord, please hear my prayer. When my work on earth is done, and you come to take me home, just to know I'm bound for glory, and to hear you say, well done, done with stillness, sorrow, and mercy,
Our gospel reading this morning comes from Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. This is Jesus telling a parable. And he says, "For it is if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. And then the master went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew that you are a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours.' But his master replied, 'You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the gospel of the Lord. Have you heard about the football playing turkey? A certain NFL team was desperate for some extra new talent partway through the season. Sound familiar? The team had just finished their daily practice session when a large turkey came strutting on the field. While the players gazed in amazement, the turkey walked up to the head coach and demanded to be given a chance to play at tight end. Everyone stared in silence as the turkey caught pass after pass and ran right through the defensive line. When the turkey returned to the sidelines, the coach shouted, "You're superb, sign up for the season, and I'll see to it that you get a huge bonus." "Forget the bonus," replied the turkey. "What I want to know is, does your season go past Thanksgiving Day?" As Thanksgiving approaches, we often think of different talents. Some are excited or dreading the amount of talent on their football teams. Others are more focused on the talents in the kitchen. Will the turkey be dry? Will the stuffing be fluffy? Will the pumpkin pie be solid all the way through? We hope. One thing is for sure, Thanksgiving is a day where we give thanks to God for all the talents in our lives. Our parable from Jesus this morning talks about talents, but talents of a different kind. This kind of talent was a currency worth about 15 years of wages. In today's term, that could be $500,000 to $1 million. And the first slave was not just given 1 talent, but 5. That's an enormous amount to be entrusted with another person for the time that the master was out of time. And it's almost like the slaves were his financial advisors or personal bankers. And compare that to the version of this parable in Luke, where Luke says the slaves were giving minas, which was only about 3 months' wages. Clearly, Matthew wanted to make sure that Jesus' parable included an almost unfathomable amount of money and generosity to make us wonder, who's got talent? If this was almost any other story, I would expect the slaves to spend that money and buy their freedom. But this is a Jesus parable, and they often subvert our expectations. This is the third of 4 stories in a row from Jesus that talk about judgment, following the parable of the faithful and wicked slaves and the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. All these parables deal with an absent master or king returning to judge what their slaves or others have been doing in the meantime. For Matthew, Jesus' parables about future judgments seem to indicate how we should change the lives we are living now before Jesus comes back again. Are you beating each other up just because the master isn't around? Be faithful. Are you giving up before the bridegroom arrives? Be patient. Are you entrusted with millions of dollars or talents? Use them for the master's glory. Who's the sheep and who are the goats? You might just be surprised. The 3 slaves in this particular parable show us 2 different ways of approaching life and approaching our master God. The master entrusts these millions of dollars with the slaves, knowing what each one was capable of, not giving them more or less than they could put to work. So how do they respond to that level of trust? The first 2 slaves eagerly and enthusiastically go to work on behalf of the master to increase his wealth and glory. They take steps to trade and double what he has entrusted with them, taking a risk with the talents they have in order to acquire more for the master. They seem to have a positive view of the master, wanting to work hard for him, wanting to show that he was right to entrust them with all those talents. Their generous view of their master pays dividends as they are welcomed into his generosity and joy, as the walls between master and slave come down even a little bit. The third slave, on the other hand, does not see the master as generous, but quite the opposite. He declares that the master is a wicked man, that the master reaps where he does not sow. He accuses the master of being greedy and selfish, of taking what is not his. He blames the master for his own lack of action, for his own self being paralyzed by fear. He refuses to work when the other two work hard. He refuses to use the talent with which he was entrusted because of the way he viewed the master. As a seminary professor, Dr. Mark Douglas puts it, perhaps for Matthew, the God we face is the one we imagine. Have you guys ever seen America's Got Talent? Yeah. It has to be one of the strangest and yet most delightful shows on television. I think it's the only show that combines gifted musicians and unbelievable magicians and dangerous daredevils, hilarious comedians, and the absolute and utterly bizarre. One of the things I love about the show is its refusal to define just what a talent could be. Whether it's a 12-year-old with a ukulele who writes her own songs, or a dance crew that uses technology in creative ways, or risk-taking roller skaters. The show recognizes that everyone has their own set of talents, and some, of course, as we learn in the auditions, have more than others. But the show is open to whatever talent you may have and however you feel called to use that talent. And after a long enough run on the show, everyone knows the different judges and how they will react, right? Maybe you've heard of Simon Cowell. Simon is known for being very tough and often rather mean to the contestants. And some contestants are so nervous before going on stage, not because of the crowd, but because they are so afraid of what Simon might say. On the other hand, there's a small contingency of contestants that consider themselves Simon's biggest fans, and they gear their acts around pleasing him, occasionally even professing their love for him. And it gets a little awkward. Some people fear him, some people love him, and all of those people act according to their belief about who he is, and regardless of who Simon really is. Perhaps for Matthew, the God we face is the one we imagine. How do you see God? Do you see God as a generous master, extravagantly handing out talents for the glory of her name so that all may share in her joy? Do you see God as a legalistic judge, punishing you for not living up to expectations? Do you see God as the source of all good, capable of redeeming even the worst evil? Do you see God as an intricate creator, weaving together the sun, moon, and stars so that we might flourish? Or do you see God as a distant and disconnected being who simply set this all in motion? Do you see God as the ultimate architect and engineer of our lives who has predestined us for good? Do you see God as a loving father? Do you see God as a fierce mother who can see right through you? Do you cower in fear because of the almighty power of God? Or do you rejoice that the all-powerful God is totally and utterly for us in the person of Jesus Christ? Do you remain in your comfort zones because you don't really trust God? Or do you take a risk because you know that God is with you every step of the way? Being a Christian is not a risk-free venture. Being a Christian sometimes means making decisions that are countercultural or that may even seem to fly in the face of logic. Consider that just 2 weeks ago in our own state, 26 people were killed for simply sitting in a sanctuary for worship. And yet you all are sitting here today, but mostly voluntarily and without bulletproof vests. Your presence here this morning is an act of courage to say that despite this broken and fearful world, you will not bury your talent in the ground. You will not let anything get in the way of your relationship with God and your commitment to worship. It also probably reflects on how you see God. That God is not someone who runs from hard times, but instead shows up in the midst, weeping alongside us at the graves. We don't see God as afraid of death, but instead a God with the power to resurrect, with the power to ultimately defeat sin, evil, and death. We don't see God as someone who leaves us to figure it out on our own, but instead who guides us, who sustains us, and who never lets us go, not in life or in death. How we see God affects not only our theoretical theology, but also the way we live our lives. How we see God determines what to do with the talents we're assigned, what risk we are willing to take for the sake of the gospel. How we interpret God's authority shapes our view of authority in this world. Our faith in God reflects our faith in the world and in each other, whether it's great or small. The parable of the talents reminds us to use what God has entrusted us with, but it also challenges us. How do you see your master? Do we really believe that God is big enough to overcome the impossible? Do we really believe that God would entrust us with precious gifts to change the world? Do you really believe that God walks with us in the valley of the shadow of death? If God is truly merciful, if God is truly righteous and peaceful and the epitome of wholeness, if we can trust that God is who God is and who we know God to be revealed through Jesus Christ, that God so loved this world that he sent his Son to save it, then how will we respond? Are we motivated to work for the glory of the kingdom, to use the talents with which we were entrusted, whether it's 5 or 2 or 1? Or do we choose a lazy entitlement, cheap grace, claiming that we were scared of our wicked God and hiding our heads in the sand? For confirmation of who God is, we do look to God revealed to us in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Did Jesus bury his talent out of fear? Or did he claim hope and resurrection by using his talents to bring about God's kingdom? Did he take risks by using his talents and multiplying his master's glory and honor? How did Jesus reflect the very nature of God? A loving prodigal father, a mother hen who gathers her chicks, a returning master eager to see how his talents were used. Through the gift of Jesus Christ, there is no need to fear a wicked master. Indeed, we are grateful that Jesus reaps where he did not sow, embracing those of us outside the original covenant to expand the family of God. Our Master in Jesus Christ invites us to share in his joy, his resurrection, his salvation, his redemption. Our Master in Jesus Christ freely entrusts with the priceless gift of grace, talents that alone are his to give. You see, all the talents in the world begin and end with our Alpha and Omega. He's got the talents, and yet he chooses to invite us into that work, to trust us with the heavenly work of body building, of bringing in the kingdom of heaven to earth. He's got the talents, and he could choose to do it alone. Yet he values what we bring to our relationships with God. What we do with our talents then is based on who we believe God to be. So let us follow the path of the first two slaves, eagerly putting our talents to work not for our own gain, but for God's. Let us look forward to the return of the Master as he invites us to share in his joy. Let us see God as one of forgiveness, grace, justice, and righteousness. And let us shape our lives in response to who God truly is. And let us not forget who's got talent, each and every one of us according to our ability. May we remember the source of all talents, that we may live with grace and gratitude, not just at Thanksgiving, but all year long. Amen.
High in the noonday sky, I see your hand.